We are coming back to the kitchen table conversations, and today we are bringing a topic that's got into the process of building meaningful connections. We were talking about communication without judgment. In our cozy corner, my partner in crime, Philip Grother, and I are about to have a conversation about transcend boundaries, applying the art of judgment-free communication that most everybody could apply to their life at any time, in any environment. Part of the key takeaways of this conversation was explore the magic of not taking things personally, a skill that transforms relationship and business dynamics alike. Imagine a world where conversations are not battles, but bridge, where listening becomes an art of understanding rather than responding. As well, we talk about the power of making others feel heard, seen, and understood, and much more. So please get comfortable and come to be part of our home and listen to the importance of being fully present in every conversation, whether it's in your partner, your colleagues, or just with your friends. So welcome to our second episode of this series of kitchen table conversations from the Brilliantly Branded podcast. Welcome.
Welcome back.
Welcome back to the Brilliantly Branded podcast season kitchen table conversations.
In this kitchen table conversation, we're actually going to pick up where we left off the last conversation, which was communication without judgment. And so this is, in this particular series, this is applied to couples and it is applied to the entrepreneurial world. So we're thinking of founders and co-founders, we're thinking of teams, we're thinking of startups, we're thinking of big, large organizations. So this applies to any kind of human being or whatever you identify as, so that you can have maybe a few takeaways from what we've learned over the years as a couple and as entrepreneurs.
Yes, as well. All the things that we are expressing here is just our opinion. We are not influenced by anything or anyone. We are just doing that because we like to share this content as a couple, as entrepreneurs, and giving back to the universe, adding value to all of those that wanted to be part of this journey.
Absolutely. And to clarify, you're going to introduce yourself. So, Maria, who are you?
Well, I'm still wondering, but in general terms, and for all those that don't know anything about who I am, basically I am Colombian and I have been raised in Colombia, but part of my professional lives and my studies was made in US. That allowed me to start discovering the world, being abroad, start to knowing about different cultures. And I spent 14 years of my life in this corporate world working for a big company. And then I decided to stop and have a sabbatical year to travel into myself, let's say. So that was an amazing experience because that opened even more my vision around the different cultures around the world. I was traveling for almost 1 year around the world with a purpose. I, for all that want to know more about this journey of this sabbatical year, I just said something in the first episode of this podcast. If someone wants to go and listen more about that detail. But then I decided to retake my career in marketing and be more specialized in branding. So I started to work in Europe, in Barcelona specifically, and that gave me the opportunity to realize that branding was one of the things that I liked the most, knowing and having all the background in marketing. So then I started working in branding, And during the last 7 years, I have been working in branding, helping people and clients to grow, to create their own brands, and to connect emotionally with the users of their brands. And today I am in Luxembourg, living in Luxembourg during the last 5 years. And one of my last projects is this podcast that have been end up being the beginning of many other projects and many other initiatives that I am working on. And I am not alone in this journey. You are part of that, and we are going to talk about that later on. But more or less, this is the average of who I am right now.
Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing. So today we're going to be talking about communication. So that's going to be definitely right up your alley as a marketeer, as a brand builder, as a consultant, as a coach. There are so many hats that you wear. Sometimes you need to kind of flip from one to the other. So diving straight into the topic of communication, and specifically today we're going to address it from the non-judgmental communication point of view. Can you tell us a bit more about your journey in learning to communicate, and also what judgment triggers in you, because we need to understand the context for our listeners as well. So would you like to tell us a bit more about communication and judgment and how we're going to combine both together?
Yeah, of course. Well, I am not the expert in communication. I'm going to express more from my experience about how, for example, learning how to communicate well and learning how to, one thing that have been changing my life, that is, don't take things personally. That really is part of the communication key key is that actually I have learned recently and have been changing my life. As a part of my culture, I'm Colombian, so coming from Colombia, sometimes the things that I have learned when I was growing up, it was that one, taking things personally. And that happens to me personally. I'm not just saying that that is a general, if you're a Colombian, you are going to take everything personal. But I mean, it was one of the experiences and the things that I realized being abroad and living in Europe and knowing how the culture is here. And Luxembourg is multicultural, so you can perceive that from different other cultures as well. But taking things personally have been giving me a lot of lessons to learn. And communication for me actually is a part not just to communicate externally, but actually what is the communication that you are having with yourself. So taking things personally, I think this kind of communication that you are just accepting. One of the things that I learned from one of the books that I have been reading is that the communication and the things that the people said is like a gift. And when I say that, I'm comparing with a gift, is the fact that you decide if you want to accept that gift or not. If someone arrived in your life with a gift, well, you don't necessarily have to receive that gift. And gift, I'm talking about the just imagine and using your imagination in this kind of things is so good because you can really make the comparison thing. So if someone arrived with a gift, well, they can have a very good intentions to deliver what they are going to deliver, but if you don't want to receive it, is really up to you. I mean, it's on you to decide to receive that or not. So I think that communication is the content that is coming into that gift or into that box that you decide I know, and in the process to take the things personally, I was taking all the gifts on me, like receiving all those gifts, or based on the example that I am given. But then you realize that, well, no, this is not just for me. I am not the center of the universe where everything is going to be about me. So understand that is part of the key in the communication as well. I mean, probably that doesn't define communication, but this is how I am living communication, and just with some examples. I think it's a very wide topic, communication. But part of the things that have been really changing in my life and the way that I am communicating outside or inside, when I say that I'm communicating with myself, is these key things. I mean, taking things personally, please, no, don't do that.
Thank you very much for sharing. And I think that although you didn't actually use the word judgment, you started talking about it because the judgment is very much related to the whole idea of narrative and how that the internal dialogue, so the communication with oneself, that I believe is that's where judgment is born. And and this is something that you and I have spoken about quite a bit, then people who judge others, and this has been a big lesson for us both, people who judge others are actually judging themselves a huge amount more, right? And that's where, ironically, we need to develop a certain amount of empathy towards those people. Because when you come across somebody that is judgmental, and unfortunately there are, we all know, if I say judgment and somebody who is judgmental, we all think of someone. Right? We hope that other people don't see us as judgmental because we're quote unquote afraid of what other people think of us. Although we can detach ourselves from that somewhat. I think it's also very important to remind ourselves that in communication there's this back and forth, and there's this idea of listening to understand and not to respond. And I think that's one of the underlying principles of communication that we need to learn. And paradoxically, before we learn that, we need to unlearn the knee-jerk reaction of communication. Because what happens when we, in communication, when two people are listening to respond and not listening to understand, is that as soon as you have decided, okay, this is what I'm going to say to that person, as soon as you have decided that, you stop listening and your brain switches off, and you might actually be missing out on some really, really interesting content that they might have to deliver. And going a bit deeper into the topic of judgment, because you and I have spoken about this quite a bit. How was your journey in getting over judgment, and how did you deal with that internal dialogue, internal conversation?
Well, it's a very good question because I think that I'm still ongoing. I'm still in the process to
Work in progress.
understand that. Because sometimes when I'm receiving comments from someone that I take that personally still, and feeling that is judgmental statement, for example, that is difficult for me. But now, creating be aware of that these kind of things are happening. One of the things that I do first is knowing or understanding where that person is coming from, or where the comments that that person are doing is coming from. Sometimes when I realize that that person is saying that things not because of me, but because where they are coming from, because their own experience, because the way that they have been experimented the life, and because the wounds that probably they haven't healed yet, then that make me see the things in a different way. First, don't take that personally, and second, understanding that the judgment is not something that is directly to me, or they haven't said that just because of me. And I'm coming back to, well, I am not the center of the universe to end up making the people just do things to me. And part of the thing is really understand where that person is coming from. I think is key in the life, in the communication process. Understand that. Understand why that person is saying that, and from where that person is coming from.
That's very, very interesting, because that puts the finger on empathy and requires us to become even more empathic. And in communication, if we communicate with empathy and we communicate with a sufficient amount of patience, we're going to be able to understand where the people are coming from, not just for our own sake, but also so that they feel seen, heard, and understood. And in communication, I think that there's so much value in making sure that that person feels seen, heard, and understood, that then you can really engage in some really deep conversations. Even if it's something, it can come across as something relatively trivial when you're having a conversation with a friend and there's, for example, a phone on the table, just on the table, right? If that person picks the phone up or touches the phone for whatever reason, it's important for us to experiment with the feeling, right? If you're speaking with someone and then they literally pull their phone out and they go on LinkedIn or on Facebook or on WhatsApp or whatever, what I do is I just stop talking because that person is simply not present. And then someone turned around and said, yeah, carry on, I'm listening. They kind of get the message that actually no, not really listening. And I know how that feels because other people have done it to me. And I unfortunately have done it to other people. And to some extent, I regret having done that to the other people. But it's Simon Sinek that has spoken about this quite a lot, the importance of being present. And in one of our episodes recently, we spoke about the importance of living in the now, living in the moment, right here, right now. And in communication, you can only have those really engaged conversations if you really are in the moment. If you're thinking about the past or the future, or you're thinking about the email or the notification, or you're thinking about somebody else, or you're not entirely there, right? And that is something that people can actually feel. And there's that genuine communication. In order for you to be able to be there for people genuinely, you need to try and be as present as possible. And it's surprisingly difficult. Why do you think it's so difficult for us to be in the now? Why do you think it's so difficult for us to be present?
The thing is that what I have been seeing is the quality of time that we are spending with our loved ones, for example, or the quality of time that we are spending with the people that we are working with. So we are just knowing that we need to be with those people. For example, meetings. When you go to meetings, you go to meetings sometimes and be present there. They need to know that I am here. But are you really in the meeting? It's the same when you are with your couple, and there is with the communication crash. Because you are with your couple in front and you are just with your mind in other things. We all know that we have a lot of things to deal with. That is super clear. But when we arrive home or when we arrive to a meeting, and if it is an important meeting, of course, we need to be present, right? Otherwise, the result after that is going to be terrible. Happen exactly the same with our couple. And this is what has been happening to us. We know when we are present, when we are speaking about topics that we really are both interested in, we are putting all the attention. It's like the way and the moment that we are delivering this quality time, because there is no quantity. I mean, we are spending literally 24/7. We are these couples are not having a relationship, but working as well and spending all the time together. And we know when we need to dedicate quality time to our relationship. And I think that has been one of the keys of success in keeping relationship going in a healthy way. When this communication is cutted, when this communication is crashed, then the problems would arrive very soon, because then you are starting to wonder, well, I wanted to deliver that content. I wanted to take all the things that it was like into my chest. When you say I wanted to put out of my chest, just to feeling better, just to share, because part, of course, of good communication is sharing, and sharing is caring. And as well, is this way in how you are making the other feel heard and understood.
Seen, heard, and understood.
Eso.
Eso.
And that is the point. I mean, for me, this communication is covering many different key things, or key steps, that actually this quality of being present. And when I'm speaking with someone as well, and I see that they put the phone in front of me, I'm feeling disconnected right away, because that is just showing me, is my phone is more important than you. Even, people are having this conversation table for a dinner, and they are having the phone, and it's funny because some people are just putting the upside down, just to tell you, well, this is not important, no worries. But just when the phone is vibrating, oh my God, this is not possible, that person. Yeah. So that generates this disconnection. And the funny part here is that now we are in the most connected world, because all the things, the phone, the iPad, well, all the things that we have to connect us. But is the moment that we are probably more disconnected. And this is, for me, something to be worried about.
Huh. It's actually really interesting that you say that. On the one hand, I totally agree with the fact that, we've never been so connected and yet so disconnected at the same time. I think that we've reached a point nowadays, and just the fact that we're having this conversation via the intermediary of, some form of technology, right? I think it's so incredible to be living in a time where we have actually started to question the quality of communication. And the mere fact that we are having this conversation, albeit via technology, we're having it face to face, but we are questioning the quality of our communication, and we have the click, which I think that previous generations have never ever had to even ask themselves that question. But maybe for better or for worse, I believe that what we're going through at the moment is a form of mini revolution in terms of the quality of communication, the quality of connectedness, the quality of presence. And as you say, I have been guilty of not being entirely present when you would have liked me to be. Now, that actually brings an interesting perspective onto the conversation, is that sometimes as partners in life and partners in business, sometimes you're simply not in a position to show up the way that your partner wants you to show up, but that also needs to be communicated, right? And I think that putting that subject on the table, because we've been talking about communication and we've been talking about judgment since earlier on, I think that the open and honest communication about our capacity to be present should also be a conversation, should also be part of this conversation, because there are sometimes, and I'm most probably going to misquote, I think it's Brene Brown, I'm not sure. Please forgive me, Brene Brown, if this is not you. I can attribute it to you anyway. It was and I heard her say this, I think, with a partner, what they do is that they say, right now I can show up. So as a unit, they show up 100%, but it's not 50-50 all the time. So they are parents with her partner, and they need as a couple to show up for the kids 100%. But that doesn't mean it's going to be always 50% him, 50% her, or whatever composition of the couple it is, right? And so the other person, when they're not at the 50%, they say, look, today I am actually at 30%, and all I can give is 30%. And it's on the other person to say, I can be the 70%. No worries.
Yeah.
I'll take it on myself to be the 70% today and tomorrow and the next day if necessary, right? Because we all have ups and downs that might last longer than a day, a week, a month, and sometimes more. Now, in the quality of our conversations, it's also important to accept that our partner can't, like physically and mentally, show up for us 100%, 100% of the time, right? And unless you've actually had that conversation with your partner, all you're going to feel is resentment. Like, you're not showing up for me. Well, maybe I'm showing up for you 100% of what I can. It's just that you're not seeing that I'm giving you 100%, even though my 100% is actually like 20%, 30%, right? And it's actually a really liberating topic to talk about. And I can feel myself even in this conversation to say, I wish that I had known about that sooner, because it could have avoided so many misunderstandings that I thought that I was giving 100%, but the person in front of me, you or even previous partners in life or professionally, they would have seen that actually I was giving 100%, but I just simply wasn't capable of giving more.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how does that make you feel? How does that concept make you feel?
Well, that connects exactly with something that we do normally, and is making assumptions. So making assumptions, yeah, exactly. That is what you was mentioning, no? So I think that person needs to be there, or could be there, or should be there, but actually you never have had this conversation with that person. So you are just making assumptions, and making assumptions is making us make a lot of mistakes, because we are just, you know, we assume something that is not real. We haven't had a conversation about that. We haven't shared what the reasons, because we cannot be completely present there. And probably you have a big things to deal with. And actually, this lack of communication is the one that is causing many problems, and the assumptions that you are doing for the lack of communication. I mean, it's like a going together. I mean, there are cousins, the communication and the assumptions. Let's say lack of communication and making assumptions is going together in the same path.
I think they're not cousins. I think they're twins, like Siamese twins. They're literally joined at the hip. And actually, and thank you so much for bringing up the topic of assumptions, because in communication, so we need to take a step back, right? Is that, and we were talking about this earlier on today, about the frustration that we have of being put in boxes by people, right? The thing is that those boxes, or to put it in other terms, those mental shortcuts, they are a way of learning that we assimilate the world with, right? So that means that when we're learning, when we're growing up, we do pattern detection of things that go around. If I do this, then that is going to happen. If I do this, then that's going to happen. And we build these mental models of the world. And so we start taking these shortcuts in our minds of, yeah, that piece of information, my brain, it recognizes it and it fits it into that box. And so this is something that we've spoken about quite often when we're talking about public speaking, is it's important to help your audience to put the right information into the right box. Now, the reason why those boxes are so important is because they allow our brain to save energy. Our brains are very, very stingy when it comes to spending energy. And the last thing you want to do, last thing you want your brain to do is have to go through the mental effort of creating new boxes for absolutely everything. It's like walking, right? If I ask you, could you go and get whatever in the kitchen or in the bathroom, you're going to get up and you're going to walk. You're not going to try and figure out how to walk. So that's your brain.
It depends on how much wine I have been having.
That's true. Drink responsibly. Don't be silly people. We do not condone drunk driving. This is not a good thing. Okay? Drunk walking can also be catastrophic. So coming back to those mental models, you don't need to think about that. And that's exactly what's happening when people are making assumptions. They're just taking what they think they know and they're putting it into a box in which they think that it fits. Right? Who was that quote from? Again, I'm going to misquote somebody, and again, I apologize. It's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just isn't so.
Yeah, I love that.
And it's a quote that we keep coming back to. And that, I think, is almost the antidote to making assumptions. Because if you make assumptions, if you assume, you're making an ass of you and me. It's an ass you. Anyway, thank you very much, Virginia Anderson, for giving us that one. Although she's
that was a joke
for sure. Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely a joke. I mean, I assume it's putting an ass between you and me, making an ass of you and me.
Yeah.
So back to the point of making assumptions, right? If we unlearn the jumping to conclusions, making assumptions, the quality of our communication is going to go through the roof. But the issue is that requires a huge amount of effort. Is it an effort that we're prepared to make? That's the big question mark. So how do you challenge your assumptions?
Wow, that is quite a tricky question, because again, I have just to stop. And when I assume something, I just need to go and prove that I am wrong.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's very, very interesting, actually.
Well, it's like a lesson that I have learned in order to, if I am assuming something, what are the proof that make me think about that? If I don't have any proof, I am not going to assume. I need to go and ask. As simple as that. But the problem is that we don't decide to go and ask. And sometimes we just have to assume. That is the problem. But if you don't go and looking for the root of those assumptions, then you're wrong. And probably you are going to make a mistake because you are making decisions based on assumptions. And that is a big mistake. So for me, is you need to go and prove first that assumption that you did have a source, and that is a trust source as well. It's like a chain. It's a chain of different events that really makes you understand how I'm going to make a decision based on this assumption. So first, I will recommend don't make decisions based on assumptions. Make decisions based on real facts. That probably that sounds like it's logic, but we are doing that in our day-to-day life. Actually, is something that we need to really recall and realize, well, I need to be aware about the things that I am deciding based on not real facts. So coming to the couples, for example, if I see something on my partner, that some things that that person is doing, and I am assuming that he is doing this because of this or that, well, really, you are really having a conversation, open and honest conversation. That I think that comes to the communication, having an open and honest conversation is one of the most difficult things, especially if this conversation is a difficult conversation.
Yeah.
And then we can come to the topic of having a difficult conversation about how you are really addressing that difficult topic.
I think a lot of what you're saying comes back to that famous listening to understand, not to respond. But because the topic of conversation was communication without judgment, I think our audience will already recognize that in everything that has been said, there are different keys, and one of the keys is to avoid judgment, don't make assumptions. And if you don't want to be judged, then give people the opportunity to communicate with you as well. Be open to communicating. And when that communication, that direct, open, honest communication is not necessarily possible for different reasons, right? It because you're not in the same room, because you're not like in presence one and the other. You might not even be on geographically in on the same continent, right? I think that it's also important to give people the latitude and the benefit of the doubt that maybe you're the one that's wrong, and that's something I think that's probably one of the hardest things to do, is to challenge your own worldview and say, well, maybe I'm the one that's wrong. Maybe I'm the one that's jumping to conclusions. Maybe I'm the one that's assuming and making those assumptions. Right? I think that challenging part of communication without judgment is realizing that if we want change to occur in the world, the change needs to start with us. And if everybody is trying to improve like 1% a day, then naturally the entire world is going to benefit, because everybody is trying to improve 1% a day. And it doesn't have to be massive, absolutely massive changes. It can be just communicating just a tiny bit slower, being a bit less reactive, being a tiny bit more empathetic, deploying a tiny bit more patience, and a tiny bit more of everything leads to huge, huge, huge results. So I think that might be a first lesson that we can start drawing out of this conversation, is that in order to communicate without judgment, we mustn't make assumptions, and we need to be prepared to be the ones that are actually maybe a bit in the wrong sometimes.
Yeah. Well, another important topic that now you mentioned, when you are talking about the way that you communicate, you are a very, very good communicator. And in our relationship, I can realize that this is have been key, because I was the one that don't been communicating very well or communicating enough. But in terms of gender, men and women, and this is a huge topic, because sometimes we as a women wanted to, we're communicating sometimes, like these kind of things. And men sometimes are listening, or paying attention, or just distracting. Sometimes I thinking that they are like at these new AI applications that are making the summary of the conversation.
And having a few hallucinations here and there, maybe.
So, my question is, you as a man, how do you think that other men are communicating, or what is the best way to communicate or understand how a woman is communicating?
Wow, that's I think communication through the lens of gender actually needs to be a topic for an entire episode. I think that we'll build that episode, the kitchen table conversations. We'll build that episode around stuff that we can start exploring here. I think the different styles of communication when it's related to gender, so whether it's male, female, or one of the variants, I think that it's something that we need to learn to understand through practice, right? And recognize that there are different styles of communication, and to use, let's just say, to use the two genders as an example, but of course accepting in this conversation that there are many alternatives in between, because what we're facing today is that identity of within any man and any woman, there's a part of male and a part of female, and some people, they see themselves as both, right? And they don't want to be one or the other, and that's okay. Right? Now, because we're talking about the topic of gender and communication, we need to understand that the different styles of communication come from, in very large part, from our upbringing, from our culture, from our past history and past experiences. And I can only speak from my point of view as a guy. I was, and this is probably why I have so much emotional intelligence. I say that in all humility, because I was, fortunate enough to have a family. The two parents stayed together, and my siblings, we all still get along very, very well. Hi to Kate, Sue, Ben, Olivia, and Mum. The thing is that I grew up in an environment that was actually quite female when you think about it, because dad was working all the time, and he was providing for 7 people. Right? That's huge. Which is, I have a huge amount of respect for parents, one of which is working and providing for the entire clan, the entire group, whilst the other one raises, whether we're talking about male and female. But that actually taught me, being mostly raised by mother and sisters, it actually taught me how women in general are going to communicate. It taught me to have that empathy, right? And that is, I think, something that we need to learn. And now we're getting into the emotional side of communication. If society carries on telling guys, your emotions are not important, right? You're a guy, you don't have emotions, then naturally we're going to carry on being, hard-headed about communication, and empathy is not going to be a big part of who we are and what we do. I'm lucky to have been brought up in that environment where I get a different perspective. But I know guys, for example, that just simply don't get the emotional side, right? And they haven't developed their emotional intelligence purely and simply because they weren't exposed to it, right? And so the masculine versus feminine version of communication, yes, they are different, but they're not incompatible. And I think that you and I are, we're probably pretty good. We obviously have some things that we can improve, right? We're pretty good at communicating, but we're also very, very good at listening. And I think that's step number 1 is before learning how to communicate, so the words that come out of your mouth. First and foremost, paradoxically, you actually need to learn to shut up and listen to understand.
Yeah.
So,
Well, no, I think that there is another very common and big word here, and is empathy.
wow.
I think empathy is the key of the answer to my question about how you differentiate by gender. But actually, I think that in fact, the terms of gender inclusion coming from empathy and communication, or good communication, start by empathy. So this is a key topic and a key word that people should be going more in deeper in order to understand what empathy means. because probably people, depends on the status of life that they are passing, they are empathetic or not. You know, it's like, well, sometimes you cannot understand why people are doing certain things, but at the end you don't know what is happening in their lives. So the amount of empathy that they are providing, to have the time to sit in front of someone and have the empathy to understand what they wanted to deliver, is not always there. So I think empathy is one of those things that we really can keep it very close to us in order for us to really start to make changes in the world. I think, I don't know if I am a dreamer or whatever, but I think it's one of the things that I have been always, and empathy is part of my values. It's my values in life, my values as the person that I am. Empathy is one of those things. I know that because of different things that are happening in our bodies and chemical processes related with cortisol and many other things, your levels of empathy actually can change based on the amount of cortisol that you have in your body produced by stress. So this is a fact. I mean, this is not something that I'm inventing. This is a study that have been revealing that. But the point is, if you at least give it a little bit of empathy, that will start to change many things. And this is the way that I see how empathy, as you will explain before, and been growing in this amazing family that I have now from in-law, and really feeling so proud about them. Because when I arrived to your family, it was empathy, the glue that bring me there and wanted to continue to stay there.
One thing led to another, and ta-da, we became a couple.
Exactly.
Oh, that'll be a story for another time.
Yeah.
Speaking about a story for another time, we have touched on so many topics today, and the original conversation started about communication, communication with judgments, or without, actually, communicating without judgment. I think you have just given us the best conclusion that we could possibly have come to. How do we communicate without judging? We develop a sense of empathy. And I want to thank you for that, because it is actually a really profound way of concluding this particular talk. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. More than happy always to bring things to the table and to living this not just between you and I, but sharing to the world and having a voice that people can actually know many things that we have been had as an experience, and actually being a bit bold in the way that we are not thinking if we should be deliver this or not. I'm so happy that we can deliver this content with other people and people can learn about our experiences in a humble way.
Absolutely.
Okay.
In all humility, of course.
Exactly. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And until next time.
Until next time.
We hope you have enjoyed this intimate exploration into the world of self-discovery and honest conversations. This has been a special edition of the Brilliantly Branded podcast, and we want to express our gratitude for joining us on this journey. While we will back with our regular programming to continue exploring the power of branding and empowerment, keep an eye out for these special episodes. They will pop up from time to time, like hidden gems in our podcast. We appreciate your support, and remember, the exploration of knowledge and self-growth is a journey that never ends. Until the next time, and please stay brilliantly branded.